Hi everyone, I can see that quite a lot of people have joined. We'll just give it another 1 or 2 minutes as I can still see that people are joining before we begin. Okay, just give it 1 more minute. Okay, it's 2 minutes past now, so we'll kick off. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining. I can already see that we've got 82 participants, so that's really good, and the numbers still keep going up. I'm Shanice Swales, and I'll be hosting today's Bristol Connects Live on education. So first, just do a bit of housekeeping. So welcome to the latest Bristol Connects Live event. This online series will provide you with the career insights from fellow graduates and give you the opportunity to ask questions which could help you or further your career. Today's event is going to focus on careers within education, and myself, Abigail Bainton, Mark Barrow and Dr. Nigel Newton are here to provide you with career insight and to answer your questions. So I'd like to start with some housekeeping. You can use the Q&A tab throughout the talk to ask questions, which we'll get to at the end of the presentation. We will cover as many questions as we can during our allotted time, but if we do run out, then please do email us at alumni-events@bristol.ac.uk. I will endeavour to answer any of those questions via email. Please only use the Q&A tab to ask questions. Any comments or technical issues should be emailed to us. The chat function is actually disabled for this event. Holly Delfield of UOB Graduate Careers Consultant is on the Q&A function and will be able to answer any career related questions. The session is also being recorded and you will receive an email link for the recording after the event. And just to also say that we're all volunteers and the views and opinions we are sharing with you today are our own personal opinions and don't reflect the views or opinions of associated organisations or the university. If you have any technical issues during the presentation, try exiting the Zoom meeting and re-entering. If you continue to experience problems, please email alumni-events@bristol.ac.uk. So now we're just going to give an introduction as ourselves on the panel. So I'll kick off and then we'll go around everyone else. So I'm Shanice Swales. I'm currently a senior policy advisor working in the Department for Education. I specifically work on higher education admissions. So my role, I've worked in the Department for Education since last July. And my role is focused on looking at reforming the admission system to a system of post-qualification admissions. So we're currently, we've launched a consultation and we're looking at would it be better for students to maybe apply to university when they actually have those A-level grades or maybe even receive offers after they have those grades. So we're currently figuring that out and yeah, so if anyone's interested in that specifically, please do go and do gov.uk and look at our consultation and give your views on that. But a bit about my career history. So I graduated University of Bristol in 2014 with a degree in history and you know, classic, did history, you know, there's no obvious sort of career path, but I'd always been interested in education and I'd done various voluntary roles while at the university. And when I finished, I got a job as a teaching assistant and did youth work across Leeds and Bradford. But I've always been sort of interested in the sort of bigger picture stuff and policy and strategy around education, and specifically around social mobility. In myself, I came from a sort of single parent family, council estate in Leeds, and at least when I came to University of Bristol, there weren't that many people like that at the University of Bristol. Now, I understand in terms of representation and social mobility, Bristol is getting better, and it has got better since I left. But it really clicked something in my head, and I was like, you know, this, I'm on a wide scale, I'm interested in that. So after working in schools for a few years, I then went on to do a master's in social policy, specifically looking at education policy and how social inequalities affect educational outcomes. I then got on to do the civil service fast stream, which for those who don't know is sort of the civil service graduate scheme for sort of future leaders in the civil service. On doing that, I knew that I wanted to end up in Department for Education eventually, but that it's a sort of graduate scheme where you do a few different roles across government departments. And while I was doing that, I still sort of linked in with schools and ran a mentoring program for those on the graduate scheme to mentor students from disadvantaged backgrounds, as well as leading a social mobility network there. And I've also come back to Bristol a few times, working with the 93% Club, which I know is really big at Bristol, and I'm working at these sort of things. So yeah, if you have any questions for me, do ask those when we have that time. But now I'm going to pass on to Abigail Bainton, who's an assistant principal at the Bristol Brunel Academy. So Abby, passing over to you.
Thank you, Shanice. So just a little bit about my background. I graduated in 2013, so just the year before Shanice, from Bristol. I did my undergraduate in anatomy, and similarly to history, it was a bit like, what do you do next? I don't want to be a doctor. So whilst I was doing my undergrad, I had been doing a bit of tutoring around some of the schools and different education provisions. It really kind of sparked an interest in working with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Myself, I come from Hull, a single parent family, grew up kind of free school meals up there, and so coming to Bristol was a real culture change for me, Bristol University. Now, I came across Teach First and loved it. So I did the Teach First Leadership Development Programme back in 2013, one of the first in the Southwest cohort. I was placed in an East Central Bristol school. I worked as a science teacher. I then worked in the PSHE coordination. I became deputy programme lead for science at the first school that I was in. And within 3 years there, with the help of Teach First and the kind of development programme, I was a member of the senior leadership team there. At the same time, I did my master's in educational leadership with a focus on the impact of teachers as role models, looking at having more female teachers in the sciences, increasing girls' uptake in STEM subjects, also looking at the impact of having teachers from different ethnic backgrounds on a range of kind of student achievement and attainment and progress. So I did that until about 2018, at which point I decided to do something completely different. And I moved to Antigua in the West Indies and worked in an international school, teaching the International Baccalaureate Diploma in Biology and Chemistry for 2 years. And then last year, I returned to Bristol and became assistant principal at a sister academy, which is Bristol Brunel, to where I'd initially done my training and worked for those 5 years. Currently, I am the assistant principal for culture and ethos, responsible for pastoral needs of students and personal development. So any questions around any of that, I'm here to answer. Thank you.
Okay, and now we're going to go on to Mark Barrow, who is the Chief Executive at the Seckford Trust. So Mark is an experienced senior leader, head teacher and governor who has worked in a variety of educational settings and trusts. So I'll pass.
Good afternoon. I graduated from Bristol in '95, having done a politics degree. and I was about to start a job in the civil service, and the day before got cold feet completely, and actually phoned my old head teacher, my former head teacher, for advice, and recognised that actually what I wanted to do was go into teaching. So I did what I guess now is the skit route at that time, and qualified as a languages teacher. I spent the first 4 or 5 years as a languages teacher, and then moved to head of languages in a school in Hertfordshire. And I was then given some advice that if you want to have a career in schools, then you need to think about different pathways through a school. And so I moved from the academic side, as it were, to the kind of pastoral and student support. So became a head of house, and then moved on to being head of sixth form. And that was a great role, because it allowed me to, for the first time, to be kind of almost running my own show with a team, focusing on academic success, but also almost running a mini school. I then moved as deputy head to a grammar school in Chelmsford. And I guess it had an academic profile of the top 2% in the country. And as much as I loved it there, and I could really, enjoy my subject, and it was about access to university, I'd become a governor of a school that was struggling on the outskirts of London. And it kind of bothered me that not everybody had access to the quality of education that they did in my school in Chelmsford. And so I became deputy head of that school on the outskirts of London. Eventually then became acting head. Then decided I got to a certain point in my life where Suffolk seemed appeasing. That as much as I loved my job, London had its challenges, and then relocated to become head teacher of a school that was failing in Ixworth. We moved quite quickly. We went from RI to good. Became oversubscribed. I was then promoted to executive head and became CEO of my trust, or our trust, in October. 40% of our population comes under the disadvantaged umbrella, free school meals, pupil premium. And we run 5 schools across the most rural parts of Suffolk, as well as centres for students with autism. I guess my job really is to ensure that the very best conditions in which children can flourish, students can learn, and adults can teach. I haven't done very many professional qualifications. I did do an MEd. And focused on what makes a good teacher and the kind of conditions around that, and then did my MPQH, which is a professional qualification to become a head. It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mark. And we'll go, last but not least, over to Dr. Nigel Newton, who is an education consultant and writer, an experienced academic researcher and solutions developer. He is committed to helping people, schools and organisations engage with learning. He's also an experienced conference speaker and provides his own training sessions. So over to you, Nigel.
Thanks very much. It's great to hear this one theme which comes out of what everybody said already, is this element to do with education and disadvantage, and the opportunities, the huge possibilities within education of improving people's lives and making it better. I always feel slightly a bit like I shouldn't be here. I left school, I couldn't even do A-levels because I underachieved at school. I ended up doing a BTEC simply because I didn't want to work. And going forward then, many years later, I've ended up with a PhD from Bristol in and lecturing at a university in education. So I always feel like, how on earth did I get here? And I expect with all this breadth of options available to us, if you think of how diverse education is, there are kind of questions, maybe key questions, which I've had to ask along the way. So number one, are you inspired by the idea of teaching? Have you done any teaching? Have you worked with any children in any capacity, or done any training as part of a sports club? I was involved in, or a youth club. I was involved with a youth club. That made me realize that I really like being with young people. I then did, when I graduated, Finally, with a degree, I did a TESOL, and that gave me a different kind of teaching experience and teacher training experience. I did that then for a while. And then there are these choices about whether I teach in a school, in a college, in a university, maybe in the international sector, or maybe I work for a charity or an organization providing education in out-of-school provision. So each kind of setting requires different kinds of skills, different qualifications. PGCE at one level, right, or a TESOL certificate at one level, right the way up to a PhD and the willingness to engage in research at another level. So I did a PGCE in London. Then I worked in a college. I provided teacher training as well in international schools. And now, as I say, I lecture in a university as well. My sister, if I bring her in, has no teaching experience, but she runs an NGO in Iraq now, where she helps provide education for marginalized children and refugees. And from that, she's then gone back, done a master's in development, but with a focus on education. So there's another whole gambit of opportunities in development and in helping people in other countries as well and drawing those skills in. Perhaps you like the idea of supporting mainstream education through work with a charity or a business offering educational services. So there are hundreds of companies providing teacher training, special techniques or technical services. Now, again, you can gain interesting experience in that respect at all different kinds of levels, both as an expert in a particular area or just as an ambassador, as a support staff. There's the whole element of the kind of like commercialization of education, which you'll have to wrestle with. So one of the things which I did as well is I developed a tool to help help young people choose their courses. And meanwhile, I worked for a social enterprise that actually came out of something developed at the University of Bristol. In those environments, I realized, am I a business person? Well, I had to be. In part, I had to think this is a service, it has to be good, we've got to provide it for customers, but maintain my hold about what motivated me to go into education in the first place, and how can we do things ethically, and how can we bat off or defend ourselves by perhaps some of the more ruthless business-minded people who are muscling in on the educational market. So you've got that whole area. Now, some of those companies are really good, ethical, and you can gain really valuable experience and get an insight into education, perhaps before you make a bigger choice, a bigger decision. You've already heard from Shanice about policy. One of the jobs which I had recently was working in on a Welsh government funded project on the development of a new curriculum in Wales. And there we worked a lot with policy makers and policy advisors in the Welsh government. And that is another whole area which is really interesting. Very, you can draw on research skills and capacities which you've developed and specialize in a particular area. And then finally, before my time runs out, I realized probably when I was doing my GCSE that what I really liked was educational research. And I guess that I didn't really know the options open to me back then. Perhaps I would have done a master's sooner, straight away, if I had really realized. Then there are the opportunities which that could have provided for me to work for a think tank or a charity doing research in education. But in the end, I gained the experience conducting research as a practitioner, doing action research as a teacher in a college, then winning grants and funding for small projects, and then eventually winning a studentship to do a PhD, and then working in as a researcher in a university. So that was a long, there's the long journey through that. And at times I had to take for example, I was at the top of the pay scale as a teacher with responsibilities as well for a department, and I had to take a cut on that down to 12k for 3 years while I did my PhD. So there was like big decisions there. So thinking now about education, exploring the different options is really, really valuable. And then I suppose one of the other things which I did was I wrote for the TES for some time as well. And again, that's something which you might like to think about doing. I cut my teeth in investigation on those articles, and that was maybe an option which I could have pursued a bit further as well had I had other things not grabbed my attention more. So perhaps the lesson from these experiences is that in a field as broad as education, it's sometimes hard to find your niche. The hours of work and stresses are often really high, but there's rarely any job that you'll find as rewarding as being involved in education. Thanks very much. Hope that's helpful.
Great, thanks Nigel, and thanks to everyone else who gave those useful introductions. So we're now going to move on to the Q&A. So this gives you all an opportunity to ask maybe to individual panel members, or there might be more broader questions you want to ask. So do use the Q&A function to do that. I've noticed that we've already got some questions coming in, which is great. So in that case, I'll start them and direct them either at the person who's been asked or throw it out wider if that's necessary. So the first question I've got here is from Katie. Thanks, Katie. And this is for Abigail. It is asking, did you need any special or specific qualifications or experience to work in the international school?
Hi, thanks Katie for your question. No, nothing special. I applied with a PGCE and I also have my master's, but I think most of my colleagues in the international school were either from England or from America, and they just had equivalent teaching qualifications. If you're looking to work in the international sector, I guess the ability to be flexible and teach new curriculums and learn new kind of curriculums is the key thing. I worked alongside many colleagues that didn't actually have teaching qualifications and had kind of just experience just working in schools as well. So I think it really varies depending on where you are. If you're looking at teaching kind of at IB level, they definitely require certain certifications. I did kind of IB online training courses, but that again is funded by the school that you're working for. So I guess the adaptability for different curriculums, but your PGCE or education qualification would be great.
Great, thank you. Next up, I've got a question from Jessie. So I think this is more to you, Nigel, but feel free, anyone, to jump in. I would like to work teaching adults rather than children. I'm currently studying a PhD, but don't want to be a lecturer. Are there any opportunities or pathways into this area?
Well, it's definitely opportunities to teach adults. I mean, so for example, one of the jobs which I did was working in an FE college with lots of adult education provision. The whole adult education has received lots of cuts in the last 20 years. So, but there are still organizations as well which provide teaching. I think it depends. If you do a PhD as well, if you're thinking about teaching, so if you think about lecturing in a university, particularly in education, on the one hand, you've got you might be employed as a lecturer focused on teacher education, where you'll primarily be teaching on a PGCE-like course. Then there's the postgraduate teaching, where you'll be teaching other people doing a master's, and there you've got adults, and often not just recent graduates who are then doing a master's. You've got people who've come back in who are doing a master's. You're then teaching with adults. So I think, well, that's kind of like just some thoughts. Definitely there are some options, but there aren't many. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
So we've got one here from Tom. What would your recommendations be to someone wishing to work in education but not as a teacher? So I can go start this, but I'm sure that others will want to come in. So as I said, I've worked in education, but not as a teacher. All of my jobs have been in education, but not teaching. So what I would say is it's really useful to to work out if you want this to be in a school environment, or if you want it to be in a different environment that's still about education and still perhaps about supporting people's development. So in a school, I know that especially more recently, there's a lot of sort of pastoral roles, behaviour support roles, and management roles that aren't necessarily teaching. And myself, when I graduated, I wanted experience in education without going through teacher training. So I got a job as a teaching assistant, and that really gave me some good experience without loads of responsibility, I suppose. And then as a cover supervisor, which was almost like an internal supply teacher, which is a bit more money and a bit more responsibility, but again, not having to go through that teacher training process. Outside of that, there's quite a few educational charities and think tanks. One that springs to my mind is called University, which supports students from disadvantaged backgrounds getting into university, but improving educational outcomes. And they have graduate education workers, for example. So they have I think 2 centres in Bristol, and they have centres across the country, but they're not teaching roles, and they're not in schools, but they're very much focused on education and development. So I think you can do a fair bit of research too, and there's a lot out there, but Nigel, Mark or Abigail might want to add to that as well.
Within our trust, for example, we have lots of graduate positions, so careers advisors, learning mentors, teaching assistants, as Shanice has said, lots of behaviour support roles as well. The graduate teaching assistant program is something that is becoming quite common across many trusts. All of our designated safeguarding leads, for example, are all support staff, so they don't have that teaching commitment in order that they can be available to students and families all day. So there are lots of routes like that and opportunities.
Okay, shall we go into the next question? Okay, so one from Kate. Lots of teaching jobs I have seen ask for childcare experience. Should I give up looking for a teaching job to get a job directly working with children first? Where would you recommend? So I don't know if anyone wants to.
I would ask what phase of teaching are you looking at there, because in secondary I don't think we have a requirement for childcare experience at all, so I'm going to assume it's maybe primary or early years you're looking at there. I think that there's opportunities before going straight into teaching, definitely looking at tutoring. There's lots of tutoring programs going on right now just to get that kind of interaction and that practice there. In normal times where you could come into schools and volunteer, obviously, but I'm sure there are some online opportunities. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything on there for primary phase.
Sorry, Mike, just quickly, my teaching assistant job was in primary, and so was the cover supervisor job. I think what really helped me get those jobs was my volunteering experience during university. So reading support assistant I did in a school in Easton, and sort of educational outreach stuff in the history department. you know, a few hours a week really looks good on your CV and really helps, along with a degree, for you to get those sort of like graduate, you know, teaching assistants, similar positions. Mike, did you want to come in there? Or
That's what I was going to say, that in terms of our primary schools, what we look for is, you know, have you volunteered in any way? Was it a reading program? Was it midday supervisor? Just so we can get a sense of, you know, you have an understanding of what a school is going to look like and how it's going to feel, and you can already get a sense of, you know, is that the right environment for me?
okay, thank you, Mark. Nigel, I think this is more a question for you. This is from Zineb, I think it is. So do you need a PhD to be an education consultant? I'm doing an MSc in education. Is this enough? Are there any other certifications that I could do if a PhD is not an option for me right now?
Okay, so firstly, I mean, the title of consultant, my former boss, who was professor of education at Cardiff University, used to say, if she reads somebody saying, I'm an educational consultant or a consultant, she just would think I'm unemployed. So anybody can call themselves that. It's the different thing about being actually contracted to provide some services, some advice, some help, some support to a school or to another educational environment. And there's two main track records. One is your experience. What have you done previously? How have you helped other places? And then it's about your expertise and how you've made known that you've got expertise in a particular field. So no, you don't need a PhD, but you do need experience, you know, some kind of experience where you've helped, where you've advised, where you've supported. And again, that can be voluntary sometimes. So, you know, I didn't have a lot of confidence in what I could offer to begin with. So I just offered my services without labeling myself as a consultant or asking for any fee, just to help in different areas. And then you get in demand, and then you need to ask, look, I won't be able to do it unless somebody pays me to do it. But you don't need the qualification. I think certainly the PhD you don't need. But those things might be something that you want to gain because you really, you know, you've gone deeper into a subject, into an area, and you want to take that further, and you want to contribute to knowledge by doing a PhD. So that's the kind of simple way in which I'd probably answer. But actually, my colleagues in schools probably have lots of people knocking on their doors as consultants, and they might want to comment too about how they kind of weigh up their qualifications and experiences.
I think for us, it is how would a consultant, where and how would they add capacity? So is it, you know, is it on the ground helping us deliver, or is it advice and guidance because you have that or they have that technical expertise? And often we do work with consultants or advisors, but they're often for quite specific projects. Whereas I say, you know, we want to deliver something in a short period of time, or we've got some school improvement work where we need to, you know, reach out a bit more. Often what we do is we work with the EEF, so the Education Endowment Fund. And so we look to see, you know, where's the best advice? What's the research telling us? What does that mean for us? Can we deliver that, or do we need someone else? And that's when often we would then look out or look to another trust for, you know, for their support or input.
And just a question from Hannah as well, which I think builds on that a little. It's quite a broad question though. Is asking how accessible is funding for PhD research. I think it really depends on the subject, but maybe Nigel, you could answer that.
Yeah, so in education, I mean, there's been a change in the funding councils, but there is UKRI funding, which you can apply for. And universities normally have a number of places, so a number of studentships that they could offer. So sometimes universities, you'll see them, they're advertising. We have these PhD places, and you could apply to that university for that studentship. So there are PhD in education funding available, and that's really, really broad as well. It's not necessarily a defined thing. You come with an idea, come with a proposal. So you're going to have to work out what you want to look at, write a proposal. And often a master's helps you to kind of get you in the right track in that to be able to do that. And then there are smaller pots of funding for PhDs, sometimes through think tanks, sometimes through charities, sometimes as well. There are some big charities which occasionally fund PhDs. And sometimes I know that in Cardiff, there were PhDs offered in relation to particular projects that were funded by the Welsh government, for example. So they needed a researcher to do a particular work, and they could see, actually, that's an opportunity to fund a PhD alongside that. So there are options available, but they're very competitive. And you might have several rejections before finally you get a place and get funding. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Nigel. This is a question from Tegan. I think it's for myself. So it says, on reflection, do you think it was useful to have a couple of other jobs related to education before beginning your civil service career in education policy? Or do you think you would have done just as well if you entered the civil service straight after graduating? Okay, so I mean, it's really hard to say. I think everyone has their own path, right? And I think on the civil service fast stream, it is very competitive, and I actually applied 2 years before I finally got on, so it was my third time lucky, so to speak. So you know, that's just how it happened for me. I think when I had my interview and I was able to talk about, you know, education as something I'm passionate about and something that I did have experience in, of course it helped. But I mean, I think the path that the civil service fast stream gives you is you end up in that senior policy advisor position, and you know, your experience in the civil service is what gets you the job more than anything else. So I would say, you know, you're not going to be at a detriment if you did the fast stream without working a school first, because you know, that's not what is required. It's also worth saying that if you are interested in the civil service, the fast stream is not the only way to get on if you're a graduate. There's a number of jobs through civil service jobs where you could apply, and I would say don't be too precious about the area of policy you want to work in. You want to get your foot in the door, get in the civil service if that's what you want to work in, and then you can meander your way. It's sort of a bit like once you're in. So I would say, yeah, don't be too precious about the fast stream. Don't be too precious about being specific about your policy area at that very early stage in your career. You will, you know, you'll understand all the different policy areas and all the possibilities once you're in. So yeah, just keep your eye on a range of opportunities through civil service jobs. Okay. We've got one from Billy here, to Mark and all, I think especially Abigail as well. What does make a good teacher?
I think that we should go back to, you know, the teachers at school that we liked, and you know, I think that for me it's about knowing your subject, so that you've got 101 ways to hook a student in to take something that's really complex or sometimes that we might find quite interesting and they won't, to hook them in. I think it's about showing that you care without being, you know, unprofessional. And I think that it's about constantly modeling success, and of course you can do this without misleading students. I think when we choose teachers for our trust, we're looking that you're aligned to our values and what we're about. You know why you're choosing us, and that you can really see yourself in our setting. But I would say enthusiasm about your subject, passionate about your subject. I think in terms of your well-being and survival, you need to be organised. You need to recognise that it is a vocation, but you can still have a life. That for the first couple of years, it really is hard work, but keep at it, because every day you'll have more eurekas and you'll have, gosh, that didn't work. So I think there are lots of personal skills that you need. But I think, and I'll stop talking, but I think you've got to be enthusiastic, know your subject, and want to kind of convey the joys of your subject.
Can I add something on as well? Okay, cool. I agree with everything that Mark has just said, and I just wanted to echo the point of thinking back to your own experience. Actually, to be a good teacher is one that can build relationships with their pupils. If you're looking to work in an environment with a high proportion of students from disadvantaged backgrounds, students that may have experienced a lot of adverse childhood experiences and trauma, you're looking at kind of trauma-informed practice where you can develop relationships, professional relationships, and build trust with young people, and at the same time modeling that kind of high subject knowledge and showing students that you're going to help them be successful, and just being human as well. The number of teachers that we see that come in and just have such a front and just out of being nervous, but students can see straight through all of that, and it's okay to come in and just be yourself. And I think once students can see a genuine person there, they're a lot more forgiving, and you kind of have those great relationships that you can build. It's so rewarding.
Yep. Can I add, because I mean, it's great to hear Mark and Abigail talk about the relational element, which I think is often kind of forgotten about, certainly in some kind of formal teaching, training, which is so, and that care, actually caring for the students. The research shows too, I mean, the good subject knowledge is, as Mark said, is key as well. If you don't know your subjects, it's going to be 10 times harder to be a good teacher, or 100 times harder to be a good teacher. I just add one other thing as well, which hasn't been said, is you've got to be willing to carry on learning, because you just cannot be a good teacher if you think, oh, once I've nailed how to deliver these classes successfully, I'll be fine. I'll just do it again. No, it's continual. It doesn't matter how many times you've taught something, you've got a different group of people and you're going to have to think on your feet. You're going to have to keep on learning. You've got to keep on understanding the subject, keep on understanding good pedagogy. So you've got to be up for learning.
Brilliant, thanks all. Hopefully that's answered what makes a good teacher. I think we've got some good comprehensive examples there. So we've got a couple of questions here which I'm going to sort of merge and sort of build on from what Tegan asked earlier regarding civil service. So the first is from Annabelle. Do you need an experience or internships or experience to get a job at the Department for Education? What experience would you recommend? I would say that, again, don't be too precious about going straight into Department for Education. Department for Education is one of the smaller government departments, actually. It's quite policy heavy, but I would say try and either apply for the fast stream, look at the fast stream internship, or look at sort of level entry jobs into the civil service. Sign up for civil service jobs, see what job alerts there are, see what's available. There'll be a policy advisor, project support officer. These sorts of jobs are the jobs that graduates apply for and get, and that sort of paves the way. So that's sort of my advice there. I'll just get rid of that one. And the second is from Elliot, and he's asked, sort of building on that, do you have to relocate to London? And the answer is no. Obviously, at the minute, given the current global pandemic, the majority of civil servants are working from home. And in terms of the Department for Education, we've got a London office, but there's also a Sheffield office. Manchester, Darlington, Coventry, and we're quite spread out, and remote working is a big thing. And I think after COVID, if that happens, it will carry on. It's not so London centric, and there's a massive push from government as well to get more policy officials outside of London. So I don't think it's, you know, it's becoming less London centric. So I know that, for example, there's also quite big base in Bristol if you wanted to stay in Bristol. So I actually recently interviewed someone who was Bristol based, and they got a job in the Department for Education. So yeah, I just keep your eye out for that. I have a question here from Lenka. I'm a TESOL master student. Do I need to get a PGCE certificate to work in a British school? Is there any way that I could find an intern jobs in a British school? So I didn't know
if Mark was going to unmute. Sorry, I was waiting. Lenka, I would say it completely depends on different schools and trusts. Obviously, looking at vacancies, what qualifications are needed. But I know in particular in lots of inner city environments, the need for TESOL qualified people, teachers, is great. We have a high proportion of EAL students with English as an additional language, and we have kind of small group provisions run to teach English as an additional language to those students. So no, we don't always need a PGCE, but I'd definitely just check out the advertisements and the requirements there.
Okay, yeah, there's everything. Cool. Okay, we've got a question here from Hermione, who's asking, as someone in a high-risk category, I left my first job working in a secondary school last year and have been thinking about how I can work in education remotely during the pandemic, but still propel my career. Do you have any advice? Don't know if Mark.
I've just got one. I mean, I'm probably not the best person to respond to this question, but just one thing I've noticed. I've got a few master students who were in a similar position. So they for differing reasons, they couldn't work in school this year, and they thought, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a master's at this time. And one of them is doing private tuition online, you know, in a good, what seems like, from what he was describing to me, a very well set up and thoughtful private tutoring site. So that may be, you know, one small option, but I'm not really sure.
Just building on that, we as a trust, we use a company called My Tutor, which is an online tutoring program, particularly for Key Stage 4 students. So I know that that's something that I think lots of us will be using given COVID and beyond. We also work with a charity called the Brilliant Club as well. And so there are lots of opportunities such as that. Also lots of mentoring programs as well. And you know, we can happily share those. They're on the Separate Education Trust website. But yeah, definitely one-to-one academic tutoring, mentoring, or the kind of university post-16 pathways is an avenue that I know lots of trusts are looking at in terms of needing online tutors.
Thank you. We've got a question here from Sophie. Are there any opportunities to influence education policy whilst working outside the civil service? And the answer is yes. There are a lot, and I'm sure that others will be able to build upon what I say. So as you know, someone working in the Department for Education, a massive amount of my time is gladly, you know, is working with stakeholders, working with those who work for representative organisations, work for maybe arm's length bodies such as the Office for Students, Ofsted, Ofqual, you know, the NUS, UCAS have policy people who work for them. There's all sorts of charities and think tanks who specialise in this stuff. You know, someone we work very closely, the Sutton Trust, a social mobility charity, and they have sort of policy and research people working for them, and also sort of, public affairs and parliamentary engagement as well. I could assure you that if you looked at any charities or any educational bodies outside of the civil service, they have people working within them who are, liaising with officials. So that's massive. And I know that Nigel specifically might have, some experience from the other side of liaising in the policy space.
Well, yeah, just research. So there's not only research that informs policy, which is being funded and conducted through universities. There are lots of private companies who win contracts and conduct research, which then informs policy, both, across the UK. Some of them are more niche in particular areas of education or social policy, and others are more general, but they include education as well. And that all contributes to policy formation.
Great, thank you. We've got a question here from Georgina. She says, I was a secondary school teacher and took time out while I had my family. I'm now completing a master's in psychology of education and would look for a role on the more pastoral side. I'm a governor in a local MAT, have volunteered in my local primary and hope to mentor in secondary, but then COVID hit. Any tips or suggestions welcome? I assume that's for getting to a role on the more pastoral side.
Georgina, I would say just look for opportunities out. We're still advertising for pastoral roles, whether it be learning mentors, pastoral year lead, safeguarding leads. There's so many opportunities in schools right now. I'm assuming that you're in Bristol, but obviously you could be somewhere else. But your local secondary schools and the academy trusts, even if you can't see any vacancies, there's absolutely no harm in writing to them, and kind of with your expertise and whatnot, I think you'll find a lot of opportunities and a lot of people looking for extra capacity right now, especially pastorally, it's needed.
Cool. Go into the next question. So this is from Sophia. I'm a newly qualified primary teacher, currently studying for MSc in Education, Leadership and Policy. I'm aiming to slowly gain experience and work my way up to becoming a head of school. What advice would you give to prepare / become an effective school leader? Hopefully Mark or Abigail can give you some advice there.
I think, first of all, it's never losing sight of what quality of teaching and learning is, understanding how to build a curriculum, because I think in every single role it comes back to, learning and teaching, building a curriculum. How do we know students are learning and understanding? I also think it's about experience of change management. A lot of what we do in schools is about nudging and helping people to change their behaviours or modify their behaviours. So, I would be looking for, if you were coming to one of our schools or trust, what's your change management? What's your understanding of curriculum? Where are you with some of the research at the moment? And then I also then think it's about you just understanding the kind of basis of your leadership. So are you someone who can articulate simply your principles? Is it that you're bounced and driven by the regulators, or do you have your own principles? And what would you and how would you articulate what your leadership style is? Often we find that our most successful candidates, when they become head of school, know who they are. They know what the national picture is, and they can apply it to our community, and then they can talk about how they would manage change through others.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, well, a question here from Marie. I'm about to complete an MSc in the education of the psychology of education. I'm really interested in inclusive education. This could be policies or practice. Any advice for the sort of roles that would fit these specifics? So I suppose this feels quite specific, but in government at least, and especially in charities, I think if you want to work more on the policy side, that's where you want to be looking. So it may be on the research side, or that sort of research and policy. So I'm not entirely sure of sort of the specifics of your masters, but if that's based around research, I imagine that you would be able to apply that in a setting where maybe a charity or in a policy area that's specifically looking at SEN or inclusivity, etc. In practice, I imagine that's totally different. I expect that would be more on the ground, working in schools. It could be working in sort of specialist school, but I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
I was going to add about the kind of in practice in a school setting, the kind of roles that would fit these specifics. I'd talk about looking into SENCO roles, so special educational need coordinators, who oversee the educational provision for students that have an educational healthcare plan. Also, again, it kind of goes into the pastoral roles available, like learning mentors or pastoral leads as well. Mark, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything there.
No, I agree. The other thing that's been happening in Suffolk is that mainstream schools have been supporting with alternative provision. So if I talk about my own trust, we're mainstream schools, but we have specialist centres that either look at interaction communication, so typically the autism side, and then also cognition and learning. And the reason why we have those is that we want to find a route back into mainstream. And therefore, within the mainstream setting, you can be working in alternative provision, and then supporting those students with the HCP back into, a more traditional route and pathway. So that's the other thing to perhaps look out for, because I think that the needs of SEN students nationally is something, that the DfE, Ofsted, is particularly focusing on, and we need to add capacity in that, in those areas.
Great, thank you. So I believe that we've got time for one more question right now, but that doesn't mean that your questions can't be answered, via email or another form, like I said at the beginning. So make sure you get those across to the careers service. So the final question is going to be from Jade, and this is probably more aimed at Abigail. So, does Teach First currently offer any training or work experience for undergraduate students? I'm currently in my first year and looking to gain a bit of experience to hopefully get an idea of what direction I would like to take in my masters.
Yeah, so Jade, I can't say I've looked today at what they've got available, but I know that Teach First are really good at offering internships, at taster programs, or even kind of recruiting people to work as graduate recruiters as well, like on university campuses. So Teach First, as well as doing the leadership development program, have loads of different kind of taster roles available, and they advertise regularly for those. So definitely have a little look on their website and their Twitter and whatnot at the different opportunities that they have coming up.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we're coming towards the end. So thanks to everyone who submitted, I think, a really good range of questions. So hopefully those who didn't get their questions answered or didn't ask a question at least got a nice chunk of information across sort of the different education opportunities that are available. So just to remind all guests that the recording will be circulated afterwards. And if we didn't cover your question, as I said, do email alumni-events@bristol.ac.uk and we'll endeavour to answer them for you. So the career service is still here for you up to 3 years after you finish your course, wherever you are in the world. Whether you know exactly what you want to do or are just getting started, you can benefit from their careers guidance, feedback on job applications, interview practice and access to My Career, including the ability to book onto careers events, search for job vacancies and view hundreds of online resources. As well, if you've completed an undergraduate degree at Bristol within the past 12 months and are a resident in the UK, you are eligible for an enhanced Bristol grad support package to help you and your career get started, including one-to-one career support from a dedicated careers consultant who specialises in helping recent graduates. Didn't have that when I graduated, so it's good for you guys. I've obviously upped that. So do log into My Career on the Career Service website to find out more and contact them directly. Thank you all for attending, and especially thank you to Nigel, Abigail and Mark for taking time out to do this, and I'm really glad that so many of you have joined, and I hope you've got a lot out of this. So thanks a lot, everyone.